Thank you so much for this fantastic discussion. We move next now. As part of Webit's second day on economic sustainers, we will be discussing driving the future of connectivity. And I have the pleasure to welcome Jim Motavalli, who is the columnist at Barron's and a freelancer writer also to moderate the whole panel. Jim, welcome to Webit.
Hello, welcome to the Webit presentation. This is Jim Motavalli. I'm a freelance auto writer and transportation writer looking at a very changing space right now. We have a very interesting panel for you on the subject of driving the future of connectivity. Our panel is Robin Chase, and she's the executive chairman at Veniam and also was the co-founder of Zipcar, a very pioneering ride service that still is going strong. We have also Sampo Hietanen. He's the founder and CEO of MaaS Global, that's Mobility as a Service. And we have Mark Thomas, who's the vice president for marketing and alliances at Ridecell. Why don't we start by just going for a couple minutes briefly, telling the audience a little bit about what your endeavors are doing right now. So we can start with Robin about what exactly Veniam is.
I do a lot of different things. So Veniam is among them. Veniam is, I co-founded, and Veniam is a vehicle network service that sends terabytes of data to the cloud using cellular vehicle-to-vehicle and Wi-Fi. I've also most recently co-founded my first nonprofit called NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Alliance, which is really trying to look at how do we take the extreme disruption that you've referred to that's happening in transportation and use that disruption and those conversations and government responses and change behaviors to deliver cities that are more livable, sustainable, and just.
That is definitely a process underway. I'm actually at the Los Angeles Auto Show at the moment, and every vehicle that was introduced was either electrified or fully electric. In fact, there was only one hybrid car and the rest were battery electrics, and internal combustion wasn't even in sight. So, I mean, we're looking at major changes in transportation every bit across the board. It's just, yeah. We're in a very transitional period right now. I'm sure you would agree.
Time to reinvent after 100 years of cars and combustion engine only. We've now hit the peak of, I think we've now understood all the negative externalities that brings, and it's forward ahead.
Exactly. Sampo, tell us a little bit about, I think you actually founded the concept of mobility as a service. So talk about that and what it is. Obviously, it's grown to be quite a prominent thing.
Well, yeah, we dare to ask the big question out here, that what would it really take to compete against car ownership on its own game? What would be as valuable, as perceived as price-worthy as the car ownership? How we do it is we put everything else together. So all your public transit, all your car shares, all your ride hails, taxis, micromobility, bikes, all of that into what you would call it like a Netflix of mobility, to make it extremely easy and more worthy than the car is. It's a daring question, but yeah, we can do it.
There are cities, and I've wrote about this in my book, Breaking Gridlock, but there are cities like Portland, Oregon, where there seems to be real integration between the different transportation systems, like the light rail, the bus system. You can get to the airport. It's amazing to me that in the US, it's still difficult to get to the airport with public transit in a lot of cities. And but some places seem to be getting it pretty well.
It is, and I think Portland, Austin, even Miami, many others are embracing the whole MaaS idea. It's not easy. I mean, let's face it. Also, car ownership and the single occupancy vehicle, it's a beautiful product. It's a beautiful service, and what we're trying to find out always, it is about your personal freedom of mobility, being able to go anywhere, anytime on a whim. For that, it's not just light rails. You need all of that to really ensure the freedom of going to places. Once we're there, we can give you much more. I mean, car will give you well, I'm from Finland. We drive at least 5 hours easily, but the rest of the world maybe 3 hours. We can give you eventually the whole world.
I think inevitably we're going to end up talking about autonomy a little bit, because the autonomous car promises to be, like a personnel-free ride service that you would actually get picked up at your house by. But the advance towards that has stalled for various technical reasons, really, and I think COVID's also a factor. But before we get into that, let's talk to Mark Thomas. He's the Vice President of Marketing and Alliances at Ridecell. Tell us about Ridecell.
Hey, Jim, thanks. Yeah, Ridecell is a company that provides a platform for shared mobility. Our customers are customers that really want to be in the business of offering vehicles by the minute, by the mile, by the day, week or month. And so we have companies like AAA that are powering a service called Gig, or Toyota that has the Kinto brand that are being powered by us. But the mobility revolution is certainly threatening for companies whose livelihood depend upon private vehicle ownership. If you're an auto club, what happens when we move away from vehicle ownership? Those annuities that people pay every year for the security of knowing they can get picked up go away. So it's been an exciting opportunity to work with companies who realize that at some point, private vehicle ownership gets supplanted by usership and mobility as a service. So being able to work with these companies now to start to put in place the plans and infrastructure that lets them really develop new business lines that aren't dependent upon what could be considered the old model.
Well, looming over a lot of what we've been talking about so far is COVID, and COVID had a big impact on ride sharing, and it does seem to have bounced back a bit, though COVID doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, or not fully away. And I'm curious about how it will affect mobility as a service, ride sharing, all that stuff. So Robin, you want to kick off some thoughts on that?
Yeah. I was just talking about this we all talk about this all the time. I feel that COVID brought to us a new appreciation of localness, and brought up the idea of essential services, and getting to essential services as a consumer and getting to essential services as a worker. It really elevated the cost of car ownership. And I want to say, with disappointment, it got people scared about public transit, even though we haven't seen any cases that are traceable to public transit. So it showed us what blue skies look like, and people saw views they had never seen. So it really had people, I feel like, reevaluating costs that they had never experienced before, and benefits that they hadn't observed before. So all these things that are unmonetized are suddenly going into the forefront. Can I just interrupt you for a second, Robin?
You said something that was very significant, which is that we haven't seen any spread of COVID as a result of public transit. That's really true? That's fascinating.
Yeah. And it's amazing that there were studies done in Hong Kong, in Austria, in Paris. Those are heavily traveled systems, and we didn't see it. And so just when you talked about ride sharing and car sharing, what was so intriguing is it depends who you talk to. So way back in June 2020, the CEO of BlaBlaCar said this thing. I thought, wow, how intriguing. So there was this huge plummeting, in March 2020, and by June 2020, they were back jamming ahead, because people were thinking, oh, which is more likely to catch COVID, on an airplane or with all these people, or in a train with all these people? I want to go with 2 other people. And then similarly for Zipcar and car sharing, suddenly people were saying, oh my God, while I didn't travel at all for the first 3 months, now I realize when I want to go someplace, I want to go in a personal car. So it's just this tension of, does everyone now want to go by personal car, which I want to say no, and the narratives around, and sometimes yes. So it's just the narratives around what happens in public transit. And I want to throw into our discussion e-bikes and electric micromobility and single occupancy vehicles, and what's that move. And I feel like all of that, COVID, the year of COVID and the year and a half of COVID, has cracked open as
You know,
possibilities.
we have to throw in, there's all these different factors at play at once. The chip shortage has really affected the auto industry. It's led to a shortage of used cars. It's raised the price of new cars because dealers are price gouging people, and
the bicycle shortage, and the bicycle and e-bicycle shortage.
Yeah, there's
similarly,
a bicycle shortage.
Their supply chain equally hit.
Sampo, let's turn to you. In Europe, how have you seen COVID affecting ride-sharing services? I know there's a service, and I don't recall the name of it, but people actually hail rides with people to go across Europe. It's very popular.
BlaBlaCar. Yeah, it's a really
I wish we had something like that in the US, but I can't imagine that wasn't heavily affected by COVID.
They are coming. they're a good one. Oh, did you want?
I just wanted to say, so BlaBlaCar got founded when I tried to do that same thing in the US called GoLoco, and mine failed and theirs succeeded. And the difference between, and I want to say there's been at least 20 startups that have tried to do ride sharing, long distance ride sharing in the US, and all have failed. And the difference is that in Europe, people can live car independent lives, as Sampo is living in one of those places. And ride sharing, I want to say long distance ride sharing, competes against expensive trains and expensive planes that exist, that people use robustly. Whereas in the US, ride sharing long distance competes against owning your own car, because there is no expensive bus and there is no expensive train and there's no expensive plane. Like, people don't use those services because they don't exist to all that diversity of places. So in the US, cities are islands of car independence, and everything else is cars.
I could, of course, talk for hours about what happened with COVID in Europe and mobility, but maybe a couple of few things about mobility as a service. And what we found out is we saw that the use of public transport in the beginning plummeted, and yes, people went to buying old cars and all kinds of stuff. Whereas our users, they came back really fast, because within a few weeks we were able to tell them, look, guys. Yeah, maybe you don't want to take a bus now. This is a weird situation, but hey, we've still got these car shares. We've got micromobility. We've got bikes. We've got all of these things. And actually, it was pretty strange to see that we got the highest active user numbers of paying users. That was in July 2020, in the midst of the worst lockdowns you could ever think of, which was people were searching for different kinds of alternatives. Let's remember, all kinds of disruptions are always also opportunities. And I think many were forced, at least in Europe, almost everyone was kind of forced to try a bike, even if you didn't do that before, including me. My wife goes, I live in Helsinki, it's big winter. She goes throughout the winter also with a bike to work. I haven't done that, but now I did. It was actually pretty cool. Also, we did see a huge rise on the electric micromobility. So the Tier and Voi really grew as a phenomena, really exponentially, and they got funded really nicely, and it became a big thing in just about everywhere. And it's a good ingredient for the short distance rides. And I'm especially happy about the fact that, let's remember, the e-scooters, they could have come with the same model as the cars were sold to us. So each one has one or two or however many, but they didn't. They came in, and it was first people started buying, but nobody even thinks about buying them, because you got them all around and they're fancy. They're much neater. They get all the time upgraded. I just looked at Tier's numbers, and within less than 2 years, they've been able to lower the CO2 emissions. So they've halved. You couldn't do that with ownership model, because the change of those vehicles, you would have written them to the rest. So a lot of
we should all live in Finland, Sampo, but we don't. Some of us live in the United States and have to deal with the reality of it. Mark, do we see a resurgence in ride sharing? As far as I know, I don't know if we're back up to pre-COVID levels, but certainly people are using Uber and Lyft and those services again, maybe taking precautions.
Those services have still changed. They're no longer offering seating for 4, it's seating for 3. So the front seat remains empty for the safety of the driver. One of the biggest differences, and what's a little bit discouraging today, is that the if it's just one Uber, one destination, you're effectively doing what we do with private vehicles, except that you don't, the person who's being carted around doesn't have to park. We, in San Francisco, Uber Pool was a very successful service where the vehicle was packed with a number of different individuals, the normal commute patterns. I live in the suburb of San Francisco. People essentially would just be in the vehicles and ride into work kind of in their own little bubbles, listening to stories or working on their laptop.
It was the cheaper alternative, right?
It was considerably cheaper. So that was one of the big drivers. Now the price has gone up. But in terms of our car share customers, the business has never been better. People are keeping the vehicles for longer. It's truly seen as a replacement even for Uber style rides, because you don't have to share the vehicle with another person. Even you're in it, by yourself, and just take a Clorox wipe, clean it down briefly, and you're in what's perceived as a very safe environment. So the main difference that we see from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic is that people are keeping their vehicles longer. In the past, you may have taken the vehicle to run the errand with a one-way car share, released that vehicle, done your shopping, and then looked for another one. And if you couldn't find one, you just take an Uber home. There are multiple different transportations. But if people perceive being in their own vehicle as safer, then they don't want to release the vehicle because they may not get another one back. So we're seeing now our customers are renting it not just by the minute, by the hour, by the day, but week-long rentals are very common. And now, our Toyota branch has added subscriptions to their Kinto service, so people can even, displace the dealership by, getting an app and getting essentially a brand new Toyota that they pay for month to month. It's a total disruption in the automotive value chain.
I think it was probably Zipcar that came up with the idea that instead of renting a car for a day, you could rent it for an hour. And that was extremely disruptive at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
But let's turn to autonomy. I wanted to bring that into the mix.
Jim, I just want to add one comment that Sampo really brought to fore, and I just want to make sure that we appreciate it as we discuss this, is that multimodality, that flexibility has been the response, has given us resilience. And so when people have just their one car only and they own it and they don't do anything else, there is no resilience to whether it's COVID or, I don't know, a flood or some whatever. That it's a beautiful piece that non-car ownership and use of all these other things delivers, is that whatever the circumstances, there's always some crazy little one of the things that has a benefit or cost benefit that's different and comes to the fore.
Well, Robin, you and I have had interesting discussions about autonomy and how it gets implemented. And if the autonomy includes the private ownership of the car, it isn't that much of an environmental benefit. If the cars are shared, it has great implications, including vastly reducing the automotive fleet and reducing the amount of space we give to parking, which is huge. I don't know, it's like 40% of our city is parking. So this was years ago. We talked about this. I don't know how we, autonomy stalled right now, but it's going to happen.
It's been intriguing. And just to think about people listening, shared has so many different ideas. And so we've talked about the difference of sharing the interior of the car with multiple parties and sharing the vehicle as your own unit. So you are the sole, you and your family or whoever's with you is renting it. So I think about autonomous vehicles and whether they're going to be helpful or not helpful to address social problems like cost and climate change and congestion. Let's separate out those two ideas. So I'd say car sharing versus ride sharing. So car sharing for autonomous vehicles will be enormously beneficial for the reasons that you talked about, that the reduction of the need for car storage is going to be phenomenal. We're going to get our streets back, extra lanes everywhere to put in bike lanes and pick up and drop off points, and all these things. But if we don't have shared cars, if we don't have shared autonomous vehicles, just thinking about how we all make this little cost benefit calculation in our minds. How are we going to use whatever it is? What is our mode of choice really boils down to how long is it going to take and what's it going to cost. With personal autonomous vehicles, we've now taken the cost and time of our own selves out of the car. So I do have this huge fear that I think is well-founded, that when I own my own car, I only think of the marginal cost of driving. And the marginal cost of driving an autonomous vehicle is about a penny a kilometer or a penny and a half a mile. And so there's no errand I won't send that car out to go run. So I think we'll really see hyper congestion. But what is intriguing, and are we allowed to ask you questions? What is your analysis for why that future of autonomous vehicles that was getting closer, and in fact was supposed to be happening by now for sure? What was the gate? What stalled that?
Well, I think they were over optimistic technologically. They thought they could quickly leapfrog from level 2 to level 3 and level 4, but those are way bigger steps than they had envisioned. And having the car really acknowledge everything that's happening around it and all the other vehicles on the road and dogs running out. There's lots of things. It doesn't deal with weather very well. And, storms will shut it down, and snow is kind of an issue. And there's scenarios where people make decisions. Like if you come up to some road construction and a guy puts out his hand and says to stop, I don't think we've reached autonomous vehicles that know what to do in that scenario. So level 2 is firmly here, and we have Cadillac as a system, Tesla has a system, as flawed as it might be, but they have a system. And I think every car will probably end up with level 2, so you can drive on the highway autonomously. But I don't see an immediate or even a very close jump to the next level.
I want to say, if I were Secretary of Transportation, I would say we have to ban level 3. So I'm counter level 3, no level 3s, and then we have to absorb that and then move to level 4, which is in specific geographies. So geofence.
Level 2 doesn't even mean very much. I mean, it's just who cares, really. Sampo, let's go to you. Are you seeing more autonomy implementation in Europe? What's the discussion about it over there?
We are seeing, and even in the cold and snowy Finland, quite a lot of trials and actual implementations. The Finnish legislation is a bit weird because it also already allows the autonomous vehicles in all the roads. It's because of translation mistakes of the Vienna Convention. I'll get to that later. It's another story, but an interesting one. I would really want to quote a recently passed away colleague from Canada, Catherine Kargas, who said it really nicely. For the world of mobility, we need to get MaaS going before the AVs hit the road. And I really do believe this. This is the chance. How I believe it, there's kind of few levels of what will happen. I'm quite sure that, by the times the AVs are really big time there, that's the end of car ownership for sure. I mean, the usage of cars 4%, the fleets are just going to be so much more effective, so much more fun. We're thinking about AVs as vehicles, but come on, we're spending about 90 minutes a day. We've been spending for the last 100 years in transport. Do you honestly think that they're going to be cars? There are going to be movie theaters, there are going to be restaurants, there are going to be offices, gyms, whatever kind of things. And that's what a fleet owner can provide you with. So they're definitely not going to be owned. And if they are going to be owned, distributed like that, look, if I'm here, I would put my car to work. I want it to give me money. But that's just the one thing. Then the thing is, will there be shared rides? And yeah, most likely that will happen. But that's not even the biggest question. The biggest question is, will it plug in to a more efficient system? And there's a really interesting simulations done by the OECD's International Transport Forum that says that, look, the spectrum of what we would all kind of as users would love to see, that a bot will pick me up and take me all the way there. So it's a shared one. I don't own it. But that will result with the current cities to double the traffic we have today. We all understand it's an impossible future. For the first 2 or 3%, they're going to be all happy about, oh my God, the bot will service me. all the way from A to B, because there's the going to B to C, and it'll kill public transit completely. Now, if it is the system that this is connected to different modes. So there's a shared bot that will take you to a transit station that will then get you to the next hub that will get you there and there. And it's a multimodal system. We can go down with traffic with -30 from the current situation. So humongous spectrum. This means that, okay, it's actually good that it didn't come so fast, because now as cities, as the world of mobility, we have a bit of time to make this right. For me, for the cities, the most important part is, and because this eventually will not be decided by transport engineers or urban planners or anything completely. It'll be decided right here. People will do whatever they want. And that means if we haven't built a world that is multimodal in a way that people love it, not that because we want to do it, then we are in trouble. For me, that means that the place where the interchange inevitably has to happen, let's say it's a transit station, let's say it's a metro station or similar, that will have to be, first of all, what I would call pluggable. So all the bots and micromobilities and shared cars and bikes and all of them will have to plug into those extremely easily. But then the worst part of this is it will also have to be extremely lovable. So that means that the interchange you do, let's say the bot will take you to a metro station, that interchange will have to be the part of your day that you say, oh, I'm waiting so much to go to that station and do the interchange. And, go into any city and look at the train stations, they're not really there yet. So we're looking at really, because the whole demand of mobility will change. So we are looking at the New Deal 2.0. But before the New Deal, we need to have the Futurama 2.0. So what's the vision? What's the dream of a city? So
let me just say that
we have a bit of time.
As somebody who covers the auto industry, the industry thought, oh, this economy is coming very quickly. And they started pitching themselves like Ford or GM. We're not really a car maker anymore. We're a transportation provider. They sort of use that language. But when they realized that autonomy wasn't going to happen as fast as they thought it was, I think in many ways, they pivoted to thinking more about electrification, because that is really happening quickly. And maybe it is a good thing that autonomy is paused for a while, because they really do need to concentrate on electrification, and that's a good thing. Mark, you're in California. California is the epicenter of transportation experimentation. Like when a company announces a pilot program, see if it'll work, whether it's scooters or electric bikes or ride sharing concepts, it's usually in San Francisco. And I'm curious, what, from your point of view, what has been working best there? What services?
I wanted to get to that, but I think there's an important point from the last topic that hasn't been covered yet. And that's, I was always a huge believer that autonomous was the thing that was going to be the bridge to us not owning vehicles, because it would be much cheaper to use one it just arrives at your door and takes you there. I think we're in the era now where COVID has changed our work life potentially forever. And this hybrid work model, the company car that all the Europeans get, which is used for 5 days a week to take you in and out of the office. If you're suddenly only using it 2 days a week, then that vehicle, which is sitting in your driveway 5 days a week, becomes less valuable. And I believe
very important point.
And more expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that this becomes the turning point where companies like, Arval, who were in a panel last week at the Move conference, were saying we're now seeing 3 times more companies asking for mobility budgets to offer their employees the ability to use shared mobility and get rid of the dedicated car. So I'm now back to to a slightly optimistic part of my life again, which says, hey, people are willing to give up their car because they're realizing they are already spending money for alternate mobility on their personal life. And if they can get their work to fund their Uber rides to dinner and their electric bike rentals when they want to go to the farmer's market, those are some incredible changes that are going to be, coming forward. And this is not dependent upon autonomous, but it does benefit from one of the hugest step changes, which is the advent of the e-bike. So when, we've had bikes all over San Francisco, certainly we saw the failed bike experiments in China, where they just ended up in landfills. The electric bike is the largest step change in transportation, certainly in San Francisco. Because with the advent of people building mobility lanes, the city moving the parked cars closer to traffic, putting a wider mobility lane that accommodates kick scooters and bicycles and different speed bicycles, e-bikes past the normal bikes. This is becoming, these thriving routes have really changed the safety. And then the e-bikes have changed the amount of exercise that's required. I was an early e-bike adopter, so I've been commuting to work for 5 years on them in hilly San Francisco, and it is absolutely life-changing. I can park wherever I want. I have protected lanes. They're even trying to pass legislation that says, hey, for bicycles, stop signs are yield signs, so you can actually get there faster on a bicycle. And
there was an argument
for things.
There's an argument for years that companies that provided subsidized parking for their employees should do something equally valuable or lucrative for people who were biking to work or
walking or transit.
Or walking, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, we made a little headway with this, but the fact that cars people are working at home, I mean, telecommuting is hugely affected. Cars already sat for 95% of the time. Now it's probably 98% of the time.
Yeah.
Problem in Europe is that there's a huge tax we get asked that every day from big and small companies, because the youngsters don't want the company car. They're like, this is boring. Do you have anything better? Yeah. And they to attract young talent, they want mobility budgets. But the problem is that it's so embedded into the tax system. Like in Germany, it's extremely lucrative. In many of the countries, it's made so lucrative to just give it out tax-wise. And for mobility budget, it seems on dragging on forever and ever to make a simple ruling on the taxation of a mobility budget. And that stalls the sales of it.
Well, the government is absolutely necessary to make these changes.
Robin, you wanted to make a point.
I just tying some of these points together. So when Sampo says, I'm so glad that autonomous is delayed because we can get mobility as a service, or I want to say a multimodal lifestyle out before AVs come in. And then, Mark's talking about the rise of bike lanes. I want to say that I had this I was on a panel in August, and I just thought, oh my God, this is so true, that we either have to get the pricing right for how much space you're occupying. If you're in a vehicle, you're going to be paying per square meter. And if you're alone in a big car, you're going to be paying for it, or congestion, or we have to address who gets what lanes. So we have to build it out so you have bike lanes. And so, because once autonomous vehicles come out and I'm paying for these marginal costs, no matter what we think, I disagree with Sampo that I think I'm not going to want to go to mobility to switch modes. That the ITF report said if you have 6 people dynamic public autonomous vehicles, those also work fabulously well. But why would I ever want to not go door to door in an autonomous vehicle, maybe with 6 other people and have one short stop? Why would I ever want to transfer? So I just want to say that we have to really work on the true costs of congestion and really do lane reallocation if we want to see persisting use of these smaller vehicles. And just the thing that broke me was the Netherlands, which I think is the premier world country for having multimodalness possible. So every single road has a safe bike lane in it. In that country, and we have amazing use cases in key cities like for bikes in Utrecht and Amsterdam is 50%. As a whole, the vehicle kilometers traveled in the Netherlands is on par with throughout Europe. So when we have this spectacular public transportation, that spectacular, bike system, cars are still unbelievably convenient. And if it's going to be convenient and easy and cheap, I'm going to do it. So it's going to take more than just, we have to adjust the prices in addition. So just my takeaway was, wow, we need to disincentivize car trips, because when it's cheap and easy, no matter what else you do, I still choose that.
Can I continue shortly? Because
Sure.
that's the place. I don't believe that it'll happen politically. I'm sad to say, but I think there are politicians a bit weak. The place where it may start has a financial benefit. It's what we're doing in Tokyo. And I'm a big believer that eventually you'll end up having a rent of your flat together with your mobility. And we're trialing that out, and it's actually really encouraging. And the rationale is that for most of the cities, building for residential areas, building those parking spaces in those areas, it's actually not profitable for the real estate developers. But they can't get rid of it until they have a credible supply of mobility as a service. Now that we've been doing it, this could really make the big change. So instead of your own parking space in your condo, you'll have access to all mobility, all the cars and bikes and whatever you need as much as you want, but they're shared.
Let me throw out a wild card here. Maybe you can each respond to it quickly, but electrification takes the tailpipe out of the equation. The car will cease to be, at least in its time on the road, a polluter. I mean, you can get into how much as a on the road vehicle, it's not a polluter anymore. But it's still occupying space. It's still creating congestion. It's still not as efficient as a train or some other shared form. Does electrification improve the environmental profile of the car to a good degree?
I would
Sampo,
say
you could start.
a bit even too much, because I even hear it from MPs in Europe where they say that, electric car is completely without any emissions. Come on, energy always has some emissions. Building the car has emissions. It's not like everything is now taken away. Let's remember that since 90s, the emissions nominally, the total emissions in transport, they have not gone down at all. They've remained the same or a bit of growth. You look at the cars in the 90s and the CO2 per kilometer then, and you look at them now, and there's a huge difference, but we're still doing the emissions. So let's remember.
Is that partly because there are more cars?
Well,
More
wait.
cars on the road?
A friend of mine named Saul Griffith wrote this. He does all sorts of things, but he's an energy expert, and he wrote a book called Rewiring America or Electrifying America. What I loved his statement which was, if you think of a life cycle of a car, an electric car has 1/3 fewer CO2 emissions. 1/3 less is a lot, but 2/3 remaining is huge. Like, from where we need to go, 2/3 remaining is huge. And so if I were to answer, my answer to your question is, yeah, I'm glad you're electrifying cars, but that's not going to get us where we need to go. We really need to start doing mode shifting and appropriate ride choices that are simple, convenient, obvious, nimbler, faster, better. And we're only going to be able to do that by constraining the cars. But it's making me crazy that the car manufacturers and the politicians who are beholden to them want to believe that we electrify cars and now we've addressed the climate crisis. It's all good. No.
Look, there's a couple ancillary
Mark,
benefits to the.
Can I get
I'm
you?
sorry.
We have in the infrastructure bill that just passed through Congress, there's a lot of money for Amtrak, which will presumably improve our interstate travel by train, which is constantly being threatened. Amtrak is constantly being threatened with being zeroed out by various administrations. So we're actually seeing a possible refunding of Amtrak, which is a good thing. But what do you think on the electrification front?
So the electrification, one of the side effects is that they're significantly cheaper to operate, and they're specifically much more suited to shared environments. A lot of the folks who are, when you see these Tesla owners, there's the luxury of, hey, I've got a parking spot. I can put in my own charging unit. But for the folks that have street parking, who live in apartment buildings that don't have chargers, these vehicles are difficult and inconvenient. But if you look at most of the new car sharing services, they are able to bring electric vehicles, which then reduce the cost of operations for themselves, which then means that they can make shared vehicles more economical and have those then be, in the cost benefit analysis, if it's not cost prohibitive to take a car for a day that's been that I'm getting bundled insurance and bundled electricity, meaning the fuel. I think this has some great effects in terms of getting people used to using e-vehicles, getting people into these, and having them optimized for fleets where they can have dedicated charging spots for station-based style car sharing. So I think it's a real boon to the shared mobility industry now that they've crossed the threshold of having 250-mile range. The early ones that had a 100-mile range were the most expensive ones to operate because they were always out of charge. They're always having to send people there to move them around and plug them in. But so this is an exciting point in shared mobility and the opportunities that e-vehicles bring.
Well, Lucid, which is one of the startup electric vehicle companies, just introduced a car that has 520-mile range, which is certainly more than any gas car. That really takes range anxiety out of the equation. We have like 4 minutes left, and I thought maybe you could each quickly talk about what are some innovations that you think you've seen recently that are, going to change things either for the better or the worse. We have you, Mark. You could start.
Yeah, the innovations are happening in cities. COVID has done an amazing job of repealing the tyranny of the private vehicle owner. We're seeing parking spaces displaced by parklets where people can eat outside. We're seeing streets that were normally thoroughfares turned into essentially, slow streets where they're parks where kids are out on their bicycles. That's been a dramatic shift from the past, where anything that was taking parking away would end up causing the ire of the citizenry. So I think that we're on the cusp, but now we just need to make sure that the government continues to move forward and put in things like, more loading zones so that the Uber drivers pull out of the street rather than starting to cause congestion. So a lot of change requires government change, and I see we're on the cusp of starting to do more.
Okay, Robin, quickly, we got 2 minutes left.
I'm going to say I'm really so fascinated by e-bikes and e-micromobility. It does require cities to create the infrastructure, but what I'm totally fascinated by is if we think about issues from an equity and mobility accessibility, I'd love to see more companies start to offer free e-bikes as a means to work for their lowest paid workers. And that would, I think, improve, people would stay longer and get to work on time more. And so can we break through in that direction, really care about people who can't afford cars?
Sampo, I've seen in Sweden these incredible bike paths which even have like traffic lights on them, and going directly into companies where, 30% of the workers are commuting by bike. It's just incredible. And in Denmark and in Holland, it's amazing to me the bike usage. And I imagine, I haven't been there recently, but I imagine a lot of those bikes are electrified now.
Yeah, it's been impossible to buy an electric bike for a while. I would still say that probably the most profound innovation is not done by us, but a partner of ours called Mitsui Fudosan in Tokyo. Biggest innovations happen when you cross sector lines, and they've really gotten to a point where they understand how they can create better value for their real estate business by combining mobility into it, whether it's a hotel, whether it's a mall, whether it's condos, and that's the one that keeps me going at this stage, to really see that this is where definitely the world's going.
Great. Well, we are out of time. I'm Jim Motavalli, and my panel has been Robin Chase, who's the executive chairman at Veniam, and also the co-founder of Zipcar, and started a new nonprofit. Sampo Hietanen, who's the founder and CEO of MaaS Global, and that's mobility as a service. He came up with that concept. And also Mark Thomas, VP of Marketing and Alliances at Ridecell. Thank you all. I think this is, I think we got into some very interesting areas there, and we're at what a cusp we're at. So thank you all.